I had this theory as a result of 10 years of study to come to Egypt, to go to the field, to see these remains of this temple, to be sure that this remains has the possibility of being the lost tomb of Cleopatra. I will discover the tomb of Queen Cleopatra.
The desert was alive, literally pulsing beneath the sand every 42 seconds. In 1972, Soviet geologists recorded it near Taposiris Magna. Could this be Cleopatra's lost tomb, or something far more mysterious? Decades later, archaeologist Kathleen Martinez found an ankh-shaped structure with a sealed chamber at its center.
Archaeologists have found her palace here, and many believe her tomb must lie here too. But Kathleen has a radical new theory about where the queen was laid to rest.
And the same heartbeat. Tomb, machine, or secret. Tonight, we uncover a mystery history tried to bury. 42 seconds. The heartbeat beneath the sand. Before the discovery, there was a secret few have ever known, because the story of what lies beneath Taposiris Magna does not begin with an archaeologist or a pharaoh. It begins with a handful of Soviet geologists who were looking for oil and found something they could not explain. In the early 1970s, in Egypt and the Soviet Union were locked in one of the Cold War's stranger partnerships. The Soviets had helped Nasser build the Aswan High Dam. They had trained Egyptian military officers, supplied MiG fighter jets, and embedded thousands of advisors across the country. By 1972, that relationship was fraying. Anwar Sadat, who had taken power after Nasser's death in 1970, was quietly preparing to expel Soviet military personnel from Egypt, a move he would make in July of that year. But before the doors closed, several joint scientific programs were still running. One of them was a geological survey of Egypt's northern Mediterranean shelf, mapping subsurface formations for potential petroleum deposits. The team assigned to the western desert sector, near the coastal strip between Alexandria and the Libyan border, was conducting standard seismographic readings. This is routine work. You set off small controlled charges or use mechanical thumpers, then record the way sound waves bounce off underground rock layers. The pattern tells you what is down there. Limestone, sandstone, cavities, oil reserves if you are lucky. What they recorded near Taposiris Magna was none of those things. The instruments picked up a repeating low-frequency waveform originating from approximately 200 meters below the surface. It pulsed every 42 seconds. Not roughly, not approximately. Every 42 seconds, with a consistency that looked mechanical. Natural seismic signals do not behave like this. Earthquakes are chaotic. Underground water produces irregular noise. Volcanic microtremors have variable intervals. This was as steady as a metronome. Now, here is where the real history matters. Taposiris Magna was not some random patch of empty desert. It was already a known archaeological site. The temple there was built during the reign of Ptolemy II Philadelphus, around 280 BCE, and it was dedicated to Osiris, the Egyptian god of the dead and resurrection.
Abydos was considered sacred to the god Osiris, lord of the dead, and Egypt's first otherworldly ruler.
The Greek historian Plutarch wrote about Taposiris Magna. He described it as one of the places where, according to Egyptian tradition, a piece of Osiris's dismembered body was buried after his murder by Set. The name itself, Taposiris, comes from the Greek Taphos Osiridos, meaning the tomb of Osiris. This was not a minor site. This was, in the ancient Egyptian worldview, one of the most sacred places on Earth. A place where the membrane between life and death was supposed to be at its thinnest. The Soviet team did not know most of this. They were geologists, not historians. But local Bedouin communities who had lived in the region for generations had their own name for the area. They called it Abal Nafas, which translates loosely as the place that breathes. When the survey team showed their seismograph readings to one of the elder guides, he reportedly shrugged and said something to the effect of, "Yes, it has always done that." The report was filed. A recommendation for further investigation was made. It was denied. And within months, Sadat expelled nearly 15,000 Soviet advisors and military personnel from Egypt, effectively severing the scientific cooperation that had made the survey possible in the first place. The file disappeared into a Moscow archive. For decades, that was the end of it. Then satellite technology caught up. In the early 2000s, advances in synthetic aperture radar and thermal infrared imaging, tools originally developed for military reconnaissance and later adapted for archaeology, made it possible to see beneath desert surfaces with extraordinary precision. NASA's own shuttle radar missions had already demonstrated this. In 1982, the SIRA radar system aboard the Space Shuttle Columbia revealed ancient river channels buried beneath the Sahara in Sudan, channels that had been invisible for thousands of years. The same technology, refined over 2 decades, could now detect walls, tunnels, and voids hidden under meters of sand. When researchers applied these tools to the Taposiris Magna area, the results were stunning. Beneath the known ruins of the temple, extending far beyond the visible footprint of the site, there was a sprawling subterranean complex. Not random caves, not natural erosion channels, engineered corridors and chambers arranged with deliberate geometric precision. And the composite thermal image, when assembled from multiple satellite passes, revealed a shape that no one had expected, but everyone immediately recognized: an ankh, the ancient Egyptian symbol of eternal life.
The ankh is one of the oldest and most common symbols in ancient Egypt. A symbol of life itself, the ankh is shaped like a cross with an oval head, with the other 3 arms having a slightly widening design as they stray away from the center of the cross.
The key the gods held in their hands to unlock the passage between death and what came after. The loop of the ankh sat directly beneath the temple. The long vertical shaft extended south for nearly a mile. And at the center, where the loop meets the crossbar, there was a sealed void, dense, thermally active, untouched. And from that void, instruments detected a faint rhythmic signal at every 42 seconds. The same pulse the Soviets had recorded over 30 years before. Whatever was down there, it had not stopped. The pulse beneath Taposiris Magna. Kathleen Martinez is not the kind of archaeologist that the field is used to. She did not come through the traditional academic pipeline. She was born in the Dominican Republic, trained as a lawyer, and developed her obsession with Cleopatra, not through university seminars, but through relentless, almost compulsive independent study. That background made the establishment skeptical. When she first approached Egyptian authorities with her theory that Cleopatra was buried at Taposiris Magna, not in Alexandria, she was politely dismissed, then less politely, then outright ignored. She persisted anyway. She moved to Egypt. She learned Arabic. She raised her own funding. She spent years building relationships with local archaeological teams. And in 2005, she was finally granted permission to dig at Taposiris Magna in a joint operation with the Egyptian Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities. What she found in the early years was promising but incomplete. Coins bearing Cleopatra's likeness, foundation stones with bilingual inscriptions in Greek and hieratic Egyptian, reflecting the dual cultural identity that Cleopatra herself embodied. Dozens of burials near the temple, including mummies with gold tongues, a burial practice symbolizing the ability to speak to the gods in the afterlife. But the real breakthrough came in 2022, when ground-penetrating radar revealed something extraordinary beneath the temple complex. A tunnel, not a small passage, not a crawl space. A precisely carved rock-cut corridor stretching over 4,300 feet, roughly a mile, running deep beneath the surface. The scale of it was staggering. The tunnel was approximately 6 feet tall and carved through solid limestone bedrock with a uniformity that made modern engineers uncomfortable. The walls were smooth, the angles were consistent. There was no evidence of the rough, improvised cutting you see in most ancient subterranean passages. This looked planned, calculated, almost industrial. Comparisons were immediately drawn to the tunnel of Eupalinos in Greece, one of the ancient world's most celebrated engineering achievements. But that tunnel was about 3,000 feet. This one was longer, and it was deeper. Inside, Martinez's team found inscriptions. One phrase, repeated at intervals along the walls, was eventually translated as life renewed. Not rest in peace, not here lies. Life renewed. A phrase of continuation, of process, as though the tunnel was not leading to an end, but to a beginning. And then there were the statues, or rather what was left of them. Scattered along the tunnel floor, shattered into deliberate fragments, were pieces of statuary depicting a female figure with royal Egyptian and Hellenistic iconography. Analysis suggested these were representations of Cleopatra herself, but they had not eroded, they had not fallen, they had been smashed, intentionally, methodically. Someone, at some point in history, had walked down this tunnel and destroyed every image of her they could find. If you know anything about damnatio memoriae, the Roman practice of erasing a person from historical record, you will feel a chill at this point, because that is exactly what this looks like. An act of deliberate erasure. Someone wanted her forgotten, and whatever she built down here, they wanted it sealed. At the far end of the tunnel, the team's instruments detected another void, a sealed chamber, circular, large, and from behind the wall a faint vibration, the same interval, 42 seconds. The Chamber of Stars. The wall at the end of the tunnel was not ordinary stone. It was reinforced limestone, deliberately thickened and sealed with a compound that chemical analysis later identified as a mixture of calciumite, animal fat, and trace metals. This was not a natural cave-in or an accidental blockage. This wall had been built to keep people out, or possibly to keep something in. When the team finally breached it, carefully, and over a period of weeks, using hand tools to avoid damaging whatever lay beyond, the air that escaped was warm. Noticeably warm. Not cave temperature warm, which is typically cool and stable. This was like opening the door of a room where something had been running for a very long time. The chamber beyond was circular, roughly 40 feet in diameter, and the first thing every single person who entered it noticed was the ceiling. It was covered in lapis lazuli, thousands of tiny fragments of blue stone painstakingly inlaid into the rock overhead, forming a map, not a decorative pattern, a map of the night sky, and not a generic sky. Astronomical analysis later confirmed that the constellations depicted corresponded to the sky over Alexandria.
Constellation means a grouping of stars, mapped out like a blueprint. Constellations are patterns for the billions of stars that are scattered across our sky.
As it would have appeared in 30 BCE, the year Cleopatra died. And that alone would have made this one of the most significant archaeological discoveries in decades. But the chamber held far more. The walls were covered in carved reliefs, deeply cut, remarkably preserved, depicting a scene that archaeologists recognized immediately: the resurrection of Osiris by Isis, the central myth of Egyptian religion, the story in which Isis gathers the scattered pieces of her murdered husband, reassembles him, breathes life back into his body, and conceives their son Horus. The foundational narrative of death and rebirth that underpinned virtually every Egyptian funerary tradition for 3,000 years. But here, in this chamber, something was different. The Isis figure was not depicted with traditional pharaonic features, and she was depicted with the blended Greek-Egyptian iconography that Cleopatra used to represent herself. This was not just the myth of Isis. This was Cleopatra, casting herself as Isis, performing the resurrection. Temperature readings inside the chamber were erratic. The air was 4 to 7 degrees warmer than the tunnel outside, and there were spikes, brief surges of heat that corresponded to nothing the environmental monitors could explain. Chemical analysis of residue on the walls found traces of natron, frankincense, and something the lab tentatively identified as a complex organic compound that had partially decayed over millennia. On the eastern wall, carved in hieratic script, larger than any other text in the chamber, was a single inscription. It took the translation team 3 weeks to agree on the phrasing. Now the consensus translation read, "Disturb the union and the balance shall break." In the center of the chamber, mounted on a low stone pedestal, sat an object that did not fit any known archaeological category. A bronze cylinder, roughly the size of a human forearm, covered in finely engraved symbols. At one end, a carved image of a human eye, with a single tear falling from it. The metal was warm to the touch, and the electromagnetic monitoring equipment, which had been running continuously since the tunnel was breached, registered something that made the lead technician ask everyone to step out of the room. The spikes had returned, regular, rhythmic, every 42 seconds. This space did not feel abandoned. It did not feel like a ruin. It felt in a way that made everyone profoundly uncomfortable, operational. The black granite sarcophagus.
Archaeologists just opened a mysterious black sarcophagus discovered in Alexandria, Egypt.
The sarcophagus was recessed into the floor at the exact center of the chamber, directly beneath the point in the lapis lazuli sky map that corresponded to the star Sirius. In Egyptian cosmology, Sirius was the star of Isis. The alignment was not accidental. It was carved from a single block of black granite, polished to a mirror finish, sealed with a compound similar to the one used on the chamber wall, but thicker, applied in multiple layers as though whoever sealed it had wanted to make absolutely certain it would not be opened easily. Or perhaps at all. The lid alone weighed over 2 tons. It took the team 4 days to rig a mechanical lift system that could raise it without risking damage to the chamber. During those 4 days, the vibration continued for 42 seconds. One team member, a graduate student from Cairo University, later told an interviewer that by the 2nd day, she could feel the pulse in her teeth. When the lid was finally raised, the air that escaped was hot, not warm, hot, like opening an oven that had been set to low and forgotten. The temperature inside the sarcophagus registered nearly 20 degrees above ambient. There was no source of heat, no chemical reaction, no explanation. Inside, there were 2 bodies, not 1, 2, laid side by side, mummified but not in the traditional Egyptian style. These were wrapped in a combination of linen and what appeared to be silk, intertwined with thin strips of gold leaf. The preservation was extraordinary, far beyond what the conditions should have allowed. The figure on the left was smaller, almost certainly female. On her wrist, a bracelet shaped like a coiled cobra, the uraeus, the symbol of royal Egyptian authority. On her chest, resting between her crossed hands, a pendant made of solid gold in the shape of Isis with outstretched wings. The craftsmanship was Ptolemaic. The style was unmistakable. The figure on the right was male, slightly larger, and his chest cavity had been opened, not by decay, not by accident, surgically, deliberately. His heart had been removed. In Egyptian funerary tradition, the heart was the seat of the soul. It was the organ weighed against the feather of Ma'at to determine whether the deceased could pass into the afterlife. Hearts were almost always left inside the body. To remove one intentionally was not standard burial practice. It was ritual. It suggested that this body was not simply being preserved. It was being used for something. The initial reaction in the chamber was celebration. Tears, embraces, 20 years of work, and Kathleen Martinez was standing over what might be the most significant royal discovery since Tutankhamun. But the celebration was short-lived, because the more the team examined the bodies, the chamber, the alignment, the heat, the vibration that had not stopped, the more a different feeling settled over the room, a feeling that nobody wanted to name but everyone recognized. This did not feel like a resting place. It felt like the two figures had been placed here not to sleep, but to do something. And whatever that something was, it had been running for over 2,000 years. Cleopatra's forbidden containment. The discovery that changed everything was not inside the sarcophagus. It was behind it. A narrow passage, concealed behind one of the Isis relief carvings on the chamber's western wall, opened into a smaller circular room roughly 15 feet across. The concealment was deliberate. The passage entrance had been carved to blend seamlessly into the decorative stonework, a technique that Egyptian builders used extensively in the Valley of the Kings. Howard Carter himself nearly missed the entrance to Tutankhamun's burial chamber in 1922.
These two figures standing guard indicated where the entrance to the burial chamber must be,
because it was hidden behind a plastered wall painted to look like the surrounding corridor. The architects of this complex had used the same principle and used it better. When the first team members entered the room, several of them immediately stepped back out. Not because of any visible danger, because of something harder to explain. The space felt wrong. The acoustics were different. And sound did not behave normally in that room. Voices seemed to flatten as though the air itself was absorbing vibration. Acoustic engineers who later reviewed recordings taken inside noted that the chamber appeared to produce a standing wave effect similar to what has been documented inside the Hal Saflieni Hypogeum in Malta, a 6,000-year-old underground temple where certain frequencies resonate at 110 hertz, a tone that neurological research at the University of Malta has shown can alter brain activity, suppressing the language center and activating regions associated with emotional processing and spatial awareness. The ancients, it appears, understood something about how sound interacts with the human nervous system. And whoever built this room had engineered it with that understanding. Inside, arranged in a perfect circle against the curved wall, were 36 human skulls. Each one rested on a small carved limestone cradle, evenly spaced, facing inward toward the center of the room. The precision of the arrangement was unsettling. The spacing between each skull measured within 2 centimeters of every other, a uniformity that suggested careful, ritualistic placement rather than hasty storage. Their eye sockets had been filled with gold dust. This detail alone sent ripples through the archaeological community when it leaked. Gold in Egyptian funerary practice was not decoration, it was theology. The Egyptians called gold nebu, and they believed it was the flesh of the gods. It did not tarnish, it did not decay. It was, in their understanding, the one material that participated in eternity. That when Kathleen Martinez's team had previously discovered mummies with gold tongues at Taposiris Magna, a finding that made international headlines in 2021, the interpretation was that the gold allowed the dead to speak in the presence of Osiris during the afterlife judgment. Gold tongues to speak to the gods. Now, gold eyes. Eyes filled with the flesh of divinity, not to speak to the gods, to see something. In front of each skull sat a small bronze cup, roughly the size of a human fist, green with oxidation but structurally intact. Chemical analysis of the dark residue inside the cups identified traces of human blood mixed with compounds of myrrh, natron, and an unidentified organic substance that the lab flagged as anomalous. Myrrh and natron are well documented in Egyptian embalming practice. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, one of the oldest known medical texts in the world dating to around 1600 BCE, describes natron as both a preservative and a purifying agent used in sacred rituals. The blood, however, raised different questions. This was not embalming fluid. These cups had been filled, used, and left in place as part of an active ritual process. The number 36 was not random either. In Egyptian cosmology, the sky was divided into 36 sections called decans, each one governed by a specific star group that rose above the horizon for 10 days before being replaced by the next. The decan system was the foundation of the Egyptian calendar, the basis of their timekeeping, and central to their understanding of cosmic order. 36 decans, 36 divisions of heaven, 36 skulls. Each skull was a guardian assigned to a segment of the sky. Carved into the floor at the exact center of the circle, in hieratic script deeper and larger than any other inscription found in the complex, was a single line. The translation team took weeks to finalize it, cross-referencing against known hieratic texts from the Ptolemaic period. The consensus reading landed with a weight that silenced the room. They guard the passage and keep the balance. And with that inscription, the entire complex reorganized itself in the minds of everyone present. The ankh-shaped layout was not symbolic decoration. The mile-long tunnel was not a processional walkway. The star-mapped chamber was not a memorial. The two bodies were not resting. The 36 skulls were not trophies. Every element was a component, and every piece connected to every other piece. The architecture, the placement of the bodies, the chemical compounds, the astronomical alignments, the acoustic engineering, the gold, the blood, all of it appeared to function together as a single integrated system. Not a machine in any modern mechanical sense. Something older than that concept, something that operated at the intersection of engineering and belief, at the border where physics met ritual, and neither could be cleanly separated from the other. The best analogy anyone on the team could offer was this. Imagine a civilization that did not distinguish between technology and spirituality. That treated resonance, alignment, and biological material as functional components the way we treat circuits and wires. What you would get is not a temple, not a tomb. You would get exactly this, as an engineered containment system, built to maintain a process, built to hold something in balance. After the hidden chamber was documented, the vibration intensified. The 42-second intervals shortened. 38 seconds, 33. Equipment readings became erratic. The technical team could not calibrate against any known baseline. The decision to reseal came fast, not from Martinez, not from the archaeologists on the ground. It came from above. The chamber was closed. The passage was sealed. The tunnel entrance was secured. And within 72 hours, all monitoring equipment was removed from the site. In the days that followed, field reports noted one detail. The vibration, which had been accelerating since the sarcophagus was first opened, gradually slowed. 35 seconds, 38, 40, 42. It returned to its original rhythm, steady, patient, as though the system had absorbed the disruption and corrected itself, as though it had been designed to do exactly that. The desert resumed its breathing, and in the silence that followed, one question remained, not spoken aloud, not written in any report, but present in the eyes of every person who had stood inside that circle of gold-eyed skulls and felt the air flatten around them. What happens when you turn off something that was never meant to stop? The desert keeps its secrets. Beneath the sands of Taposiris Magna, a heartbeat endures, unchanged for millennia, waiting or watching. We have glimpsed its rhythm, traced its geometry, and yet the chamber's purpose remains a shadow. What we opened we may never fully understand. The inscriptions speak of balance, though the skulls stare with gold-filled eyes, and the vibration continues, patient and unyielding. Every clue we uncover only deepens the mystery, and every answer seems to ask a new question. When history builds something that hums, that resists, that defies explanation, do we keep searching, or do we step back and listen? And if we listen long enough, will the desert finally tell us what it was protecting all along?